Welcome to Sleepy Stories. In this episode, we will take a clear and steady look at the human fascination with life after death, why the question arises, how it has shaped civilizations, and what science and history reveal about its origins. The goal is to help you learn while you rest. If you do not fall asleep right away, that is completely fine. In the time you are awake, you will discover how the idea of an afterlife connects psychology, culture, and biology in quiet, meaningful ways. Simply listen, let your breathing slow, and allow the information to settle at its own pace. The question of what happens after death is one of the oldest and most persistent in human history. Long before the written word, before organized religion, even before agriculture, humans were already making sense of death. Archaeological findings suggest that Neanderthals may have buried their dead intentionally. Later, early Homo sapiens buried individuals with shells, tools, and pigments, indicating that even tens of thousands of years ago, humans suspected that something continued after the body stopped moving. From a scientific perspective, this impulse may be linked to several traits unique to humans. We have an advanced capacity for symbolic thought, a robust memory system that stores narratives, and a sense of linear time. These allow us not only to remember the past but to anticipate the future, including our own end. This foresight, while advantageous for survival, also brings with it the weight of existential awareness. Knowing that death is inevitable creates a powerful emotional tension, one that our ancestors likely tried to ease through rituals, stories, and imagined continuities. Cognitive scientists have suggested that the mind naturally resists the concept of non-existence. Most people find it difficult to picture a world in which they no longer exist. This inability may not just be emotional, it may be structural. The human brain evolved to generate models of the world with the self at the center. Even in imagination, the idea of absolute absence contradicts the way consciousness operates. Instead of imagining death as nothingness, the brain often fills that void with continuity, whether in a heaven, a rebirth, a reunion, or a return to nature. Across cultures and time periods, these imagined continuities took on many forms. In some societies, death led to a journey. In others, it marked a transformation. Some envisioned rewards and punishments, others, cycles and returns. What they share is the assumption that life is not a closed loop but a door, a passage to something else. These beliefs are not random. They form predictable patterns, often reflecting the society's relationship with nature, justice, or memory. The anthropologist Ernest Becker argued that much of human behavior, our drive to create, to dominate, to love, and to believe, can be traced back to our awareness of mortality. He proposed that culture itself may have emerged in part to manage the terror of death. Rituals, myths, and systems of meaning give us a framework for understanding what lies beyond and for facing what we cannot control. Science cannot verify what, if anything, happens after death, but it can illuminate why we ask the question in the first place. It can show us that the yearning for an afterlife is not a flaw or a weakness. It is a reflection of the mind's search for coherence and the heart's resistance to letting go. Even if we never find an answer, the asking itself tells us something vital, that we are a species driven not only to survive, but to understand, to remember, and to imagine. The human brain is capable of incredible abstraction. It can visualize distant galaxies, simulate impossible futures, and imagine entire worlds that have never existed. Yet despite all this, it falters when trying to imagine one thing: its own end. The concept of death, not as something that happens to others, but as the absolute cessation of the self, is one of the hardest ideas for the mind to grasp. Even when we know intellectually that death is inevitable, something within us resists the idea emotionally and experientially. Cognitive scientists refer to this as death denial, and it appears to be deeply embedded in how the human brain is structured. One reason may be the brain's model of self-continuity. Neurologically, we construct our identity as a continuous story, an unfolding timeline that stretches from childhood into the future. That narrative is not something we just reflect on, it's the very foundation of our day-to-day thinking. Even mundane decisions rely on projecting ourselves into the future: what to eat, where to go, what to plan. Our ability to do this is largely a product of the prefrontal cortex, which allows for long-term planning and the simulation of future events. This predictive capacity is an evolutionary strength. It helps us make choices that enhance survival, but it comes with a side effect. Once the brain builds a self-model that is projected into tomorrow, it finds it difficult to accept that there may be no tomorrow at all. Death, then, is not just frightening, it is cognitively disruptive. It breaks the expected flow of time in a way the mind struggles to process. Experiments in psychology have shown that when people are asked to think about their own death in abstract terms, they often respond with avoidance, anxiety, or attempts to reframe the issue. This is known as terror management theory, which posits that much of human culture, morality, religion, art, even humor, developed as a buffer against the psychological threat of mortality. When reminded of death, people tend to reinforce their beliefs more strongly, seek social validation, and show increased allegiance to cultural norms. It is as though the mind, confronted with the void, immediately reaches for structure. Children, too, exhibit early signs of this struggle. Developmental psychologists have found that children under the age of 7 often do not fully grasp the permanence of death. Even when they see an animal die, they may believe it can still eat or play. This misunderstanding is not simply due to inexperience. It reflects how difficult it is to conceptualize a world without the self in it. As children grow older, this awareness deepens, but the discomfort often remains, manifesting as fascination, fear, or questions about what happens next. Even our dreams resist the idea of personal non-existence. In sleep, we may encounter danger, transformation, or even symbolic death, but rarely do we experience a dream in which we are permanently gone. The dreaming brain tends to preserve a sense of presence, no matter the scenario. This reinforces the idea that the brain is wired to simulate ongoing experience, not its termination. In neuroscience, the concept of the default mode network offers further insight. This network of brain regions is active when the mind is at rest and focused inward, on memories, daydreams, and the self. It is involved in constructing our internal narrative and imagining other perspectives. Disruptions to this network, such as during deep meditation or psychedelic states, can dissolve the sense of self temporarily, leading to feelings of timelessness or ego death. Even in those altered states, however, awareness continues. The idea of complete discontinuity remains outside the scope of conscious imagination. What emerges is a picture of a mind that is capable of knowing death as an abstract fact, but not of feeling it as a lived reality. Instead, we fill that space with something more palatable: visions of continuation, reunion, or transformation. Whether these take the form of religious beliefs, symbolic legacies, or even fictional stories, they serve a psychological function, giving shape to the unshapable, presence to the absence. Perhaps this inability to picture our own non-existence is not a failure of imagination, but a testament to how deeply life affirms itself. The mind, being alive, cannot help but create, and when it turns its gaze toward the unknown, it draws not a blank, but a bridge. Burial is not merely a practical act. It is a gesture that suggests meaning. To place a body in the ground with care, to arrange objects beside it, to mark the spot, these are signs of thought that reaches beyond the moment. Archaeology provides some of the earliest and most compelling evidence that humans, and even some of our evolutionary relatives, have long pondered what lies beyond death. The act of burial may be the oldest surviving expression of the idea that death is not the end, but a transition. Some of the most intriguing early burials come from Neanderthal sites, notably in Shanidar Cave in modern-day Iraq. In one grave, pollen from ancient flowers was found around the remains, leading researchers to believe that the body may have been placed there with floral offerings. Though some debate remains about the exact interpretation of the evidence, the intentional placement of the body and the surrounding artifacts suggest care, attention, and possibly a belief in continued existence beyond the physical. Later, early Homo sapiens demonstrated more complex burial practices. At Qafzeh and School in present-day Israel, bodies were found buried alongside items such as red ochre, shells, tools, and animal bones. These burials date back over 100,000 years and suggest symbolic thinking, the use of colors, tokens, and arrangements that go beyond the utilitarian. Red ochre, in particular, has long been associated with blood, life, and rebirth, making its appearance in burials especially significant. As human societies evolved, burial practices became increasingly elaborate. In ancient Egypt, the dead were embalmed, wrapped in linen, and placed in decorated coffins alongside amulets, food, and texts like the Book of the Dead. These rituals were meant to guide the soul through the afterlife. In China, the tombs of nobility included not only jade and pottery, but sometimes full-sized statues of servants or warriors. In South America, the Nazca and Moche peoples buried their dead in seated positions, surrounded by offerings that included tools and woven fabrics, often meant to accompany the deceased into the next life. Anthropologists interpret these rituals as more than just cultural artifacts. They reveal how human beings conceptualize death. In societies where death was seen as a journey, items were included to help the soul travel. In others, the burial site was a gateway or a mirror of the world beyond. In many cases, ancestors were revered, suggesting that the dead retained influence and required ongoing attention. These beliefs likely served social functions as well, strengthening group identity and continuity. Burial may have also been a form of emotional processing. Grief, though biologically rooted, is shaped by culture. To bury a loved one with care provides a structure for mourning, a way to acknowledge the loss while honoring the person's existence. In placing objects with the dead, the living may have been enacting one final conversation, a message of love, hope, or remembrance. Modern cognitive archaeology examines these practices through the lens of brain development. The emergence of burial correlates with increased brain volume, especially in the frontal and parietal lobes, which are involved in abstract thought, empathy, and planning. These areas support our ability to imagine scenarios beyond the present, including the existence of an afterlife. In this way, burial is not just a cultural act but a neurological milestone, evidence that the human mind had begun to think symbolically, emotionally, and spiritually. Today, burial practices remain diverse. Some cultures cremate, others entomb, and some return the body to nature. Still, the presence of ritual persists. Whether in a quiet forest ceremony or a grand cathedral, the gestures remain, words spoken, items placed, hands held. These acts continue a lineage of meaning that stretches back tens of thousands of years. In the earth's soil lie traces of our oldest questions. The graves carved into stone, the pigments scattered beside bones, the worn beads clasped in skeletal fingers. These are not just remnants of lives once lived. They are echoes of thought, of memory, and of a hope that death does not silence everything. Even in prehistory, the act of burial whispered something forward, that life, in some form, might go on. Across the world and throughout history, human cultures have developed remarkably diverse visions of what happens after death. These stories vary in detail. Some speak of underworlds, others of sky realms, reincarnations, or endless journeys, but many share common structural elements. The presence of such similarities across civilizations separated by oceans and centuries has long intrigued anthropologists and cognitive scientists alike. These recurring motifs may tell us as much about the human mind as they do about any external truth. The ancient Egyptians envisioned an afterlife called the Duat, a vast realm beneath the horizon where the soul journeyed through perilous trials. There, it faced a final judgment in the Hall of Ma'at, where its heart was weighed against a feather. A heart too heavy with wrongdoing would be devoured by Amit, the soul-eating goddess. But if balanced, the deceased could enter the field of reeds, a paradise of abundance and peace. These beliefs shaped daily life. Ethics, rituals, and tomb construction were all oriented around securing a good afterlife. In Mesopotamia, the underworld was less forgiving. Known as Irkalla, it was a dusty, joyless realm where the dead existed as shadows. Regardless of moral conduct in life, all souls went there. Offerings from the living helped sustain them, but escape was impossible. This vision reflects a society that saw death not as judgment, but as inevitability, a mirror of the harsh and unpredictable environment in which Mesopotamian civilization developed. The Greeks believed in Hades, a shadowy underworld ruled by the god of the same name, while some souls, heroes and the virtuous, might ascend to the Elysian fields. Most entered a neutral existence of forgetfulness. The river Styx, the ferryman Charon, and the gates guarded by Cerberus are all symbols deeply embedded in Western imagination. These myths emphasize the importance of ritual and memory. Unburied souls could not cross into the afterlife, and those forgotten might wander lost forever. In contrast, many indigenous American cultures emphasized cyclical continuities. The Hopi and Zuni people told of Kachinas, spirit beings who lived in the sky but visited Earth to guide the living. The Aztecs believed in several afterlives, each corresponding to the nature of one's death. Warriors who died in battle joined the sun god, while those who drowned entered the paradise of Tlaloc. These visions often linked the afterlife to natural cycles, sunrise and sunset, seasons, rainfall, suggesting that death was not an end but a transformation within nature's rhythm. In East Asia, concepts of reincarnation and ancestral reverence dominate. In Chinese tradition, the afterlife is structured like a mirror of the earthly world, with bureaucracies, gates, and moral accounting. Ancestors remain part of the family and are honored through offerings and rituals. Buddhism and Hinduism introduced complex ideas of karma and rebirth, in which the soul moves through cycles of existence, shaped by intention and action. Liberation from this cycle, nirvana or moksha, is considered the ultimate spiritual goal, representing freedom from suffering and illusion. What unites many of these myths is the metaphor of journey. The soul travels, a bridge crossed, a path taken, a river forded. These narratives mirror human experiences of movement, transition, and passage. Death becomes not a wall, but a crossing. And in most versions, some form of moral logic appears. Actions in life affect what follows, whether through divine judgment, karmic accumulation, or social memory. Psychologists suggest that such themes arise from universal human experiences: the fear of separation, the longing for justice, the desire for continuity, all find symbolic expression in afterlife stories. Studies in cognitive science have shown that children across cultures intuitively grasp the idea that the mind or soul can exist beyond the body. Even before being taught specific doctrines, they often assume that emotions or thoughts continue after death. This suggests that belief in the afterlife may emerge from natural tendencies in mental development. Rather than seeing these myths as contradictions, we can view them as variations on a shared theme. Each culture uses the language of its environment, desert, mountain, forest, river, to frame a deeper question. What happens when we close our eyes for the last time? These stories do not answer definitively, but they do provide shape and color to the unknown. In them, we hear echoes of our oldest hopes, that there is more than loss, that love persists, that the self continues. Whether as spirits, stars, or cycles, these myths stretch the thread of life a little further, weaving it into something larger than one existence alone. Throughout human history, the afterlife has often been imagined as a realm of moral consequence, a place where actions in life determine fate beyond death. These ideas have taken many forms, but the basic structure remains familiar: a heaven for the virtuous, a hell for the wicked. While interpretations vary across cultures and religions, the concept of judgment after death has shaped laws, ethics, and behavior for thousands of years. From ancient Zoroastrian texts to modern religious teachings, the division between reward and punishment has remained one of the most enduring frameworks for thinking about life after death. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, introduced many concepts that later appeared in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In its vision of the afterlife, the soul crosses a bridge known as the Chinvat Bridge. For the righteous, the bridge widens and leads to a peaceful afterlife. For the wicked, it narrows to a blade's edge and casts the soul into a dark abyss. This early dualistic model, dividing the cosmos into forces of good and evil, provided a template for the structured heavens and hells of later faiths. In Christianity, the idea of heaven is often portrayed as a realm of eternal peace, joy, and closeness to God. Hell, conversely, is a place of torment, separation, or annihilation, depending on doctrinal interpretation. These concepts have evolved over centuries. Early Christian texts describe heaven as a kingdom, a banquet, or a restored Eden. Hell appears as a fiery pit, a prison, or a place of weeping. The emphasis is not just on reward or punishment, but on moral alignment, on having chosen the right path during one's life. Islam presents a similarly structured vision. The soul is judged after death based on its deeds, intentions, and faith. Heaven, or Jannah, is a garden of bliss, full of rivers, companionship, and peace. Hell, or Jahannam, is described in vivid detail, with levels of suffering corresponding to the severity of a person's misdeeds. The Quran emphasizes divine justice and mercy, and many interpretations allow for the eventual release of some souls from punishment, reinforcing the idea of moral gradation rather than absolute division. Buddhism and Hinduism also include concepts of heavens and hells, though within a different framework. These are not eternal destinations, but temporary states within the cycle of rebirth. In Buddhist cosmology, there are multiple heavens and hells, realms of existence shaped by karma. A person may be reborn in a heavenly realm due to virtuous actions, or suffer in a hellish plane due to harmful behavior. But these states are impermanent. The ultimate goal is not heaven, but liberation from the cycle itself. Nirvana, a state beyond suffering and duality. From a psychological perspective, the idea of judgment after death serves multiple functions. It reinforces moral codes, promotes social cohesion, and offers a sense of justice that may not always be present in life. When wrongdoers seem to prosper and the kind suffer, the notion of an afterlife where balance is restored can be emotionally reassuring. It offers closure, especially in cases where life feels unfair or incomplete. Neuroscience also sheds light on how the brain processes moral reasoning. The prefrontal cortex, involved in ethical decision-making, interacts with emotional centers like the amygdala to create a sense of right and wrong. Belief in moral consequences, whether in this life or beyond, can influence how people behave, even when no one is watching. Studies have shown that individuals reminded of divine punishment are more likely to act altruistically, even in anonymous situations. At the same time, the imagery of hell has often been used to instill fear or enforce control. Throughout history, depictions of eternal punishment have served institutional power, deterring dissent or reinforcing authority. This dual use, both comforting and coercive, highlights the complex role such beliefs play in human societies. Still, for many, the vision of heaven and hell is not about fear or control, but about meaning. It provides a moral structure to life and offers hope that goodness matters. The idea that our actions ripple beyond our final breath, that love, kindness, and justice are not lost at death, can bring comfort in the face of uncertainty. And even for those who do not hold a literal belief in reward or punishment, the symbolic power remains. Heaven and hell represent the longing for order, the wish that the story of a life carries forward into something more. They speak to our need to believe that how we live matters, not just now, but always. Consciousness is among the most studied and least understood phenomena in science. It is the experience of awareness, the sensation of being present, the feeling of having a self. While the body and brain can be observed, measured, and dissected, consciousness remains elusive. It is not something we can point to in the brain, yet without it, the brain becomes a silent organ. Understanding consciousness is key to exploring the question of life after death, because it is consciousness, not the body, that people usually imagine continuing after the moment of death. Neuroscience has mapped the brain in great detail. We know that certain regions are associated with specific functions. The prefrontal cortex supports decision-making and personality. The parietal lobes manage spatial awareness. The temporal lobes process sound and memory. But there is no single seat of consciousness. Instead, consciousness appears to be an emergent property, a product of complex communication between multiple brain regions. One prominent theory is the global workspace theory. It suggests that consciousness arises when information is broadcast across the brain's network, making it available for language, memory, and action. Another theory, known as integrated information theory, proposes that consciousness corresponds to the level of integration in a system, the degree to which parts work together to create unified experiences. Both models emphasize connection and coordination, not location. They point toward a dynamic process, not a fixed center. Brain imaging has revealed that certain areas are more active during conscious awareness, particularly regions in the cortex. When someone is anesthetized or in a coma, these regions show reduced connectivity. In sleep, especially during non-REM stages, consciousness dims but doesn't disappear entirely. This fluctuation helps researchers understand the spectrum of consciousness, from full alertness to unconsciousness, with dreaming in between. It also supports the idea that consciousness is graded, not binary. The challenge comes when we ask how brain activity becomes subjective experience. Why does the firing of neurons produce the feeling of pain, the taste of food, or the memory of a childhood moment? This is the so-called hard problem of consciousness. Unlike blood flow or muscle contraction, subjective experience cannot be directly observed or measured. We know it exists because we live it, but we cannot locate it in space. This is where science begins to encounter mystery, not in defiance of knowledge, but at the edge of it. Some researchers argue that consciousness is not merely an effect of the brain, but a fundamental property of the universe, like gravity or time. This view, known as panpsychism, suggests that all matter contains some form of proto-consciousness. While this idea remains speculative and controversial, it arises from the difficulty of explaining how subjective awareness could emerge from physical matter alone. At the other end of the spectrum, strict materialists assert that consciousness is entirely dependent on brain function. When the brain ceases to operate, awareness ends. This perspective is supported by clinical observations. When brain activity flatlines, consciousness vanishes. But questions remain. Are there forms of consciousness we do not yet know how to detect? Can awareness persist briefly beyond observable brain activity? These remain open inquiries. Understanding consciousness also sheds light on altered states, near-death experiences, mystical visions, dreams, and hallucinations. These are not necessarily signs of another world, but expressions of the brain's capacity to generate vivid experiences even under extreme conditions. They remind us that reality, as we perceive it, is shaped by the structures of consciousness itself. As you lie back and allow your body to relax, your own consciousness shifts into a slower rhythm. This, too, is a journey, from alert awareness into a quieter place, where memory softens, thoughts drift, and sensation blurs. If you do not fall asleep right away, that is completely fine. In this in-between state, your mind continues to listen and learn, even as your body grows still. Sleep and consciousness are not opposites. They are part of the same continuum, just different forms of presence. Consciousness is the light by which we know the world. Whether it flickers briefly at the end or moves beyond our understanding, it remains the core of what it means to be alive. And in seeking to understand it, we learn not only about the brain, but about the quiet mystery at the center of our being. Near-death experiences occupy a strange borderland between biology and mystery. Reported by people who were close to death or briefly without detectable signs of life, these accounts often include vivid sensations, moving through a tunnel, seeing a bright light, feeling overwhelming peace, or encountering deceased relatives. For those who experience them, the events feel deeply real, even transformative. But from a scientific perspective, the question remains, are near-death experiences glimpses of an afterlife, or are they manifestations of the brain under extreme stress? Research into these experiences began in earnest in the 1970 seconds, particularly with the publication of Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. Since then, thousands of reports have been collected from around the world, across cultures, religions, and ages. The consistency of certain themes is striking. People often describe a sense of floating above their bodies, moving through a tunnel, encountering a brilliant light, or undergoing a review of their lives. These elements appear regardless of the person's prior beliefs or medical background, which has led some to argue that the experience reflects something more than biology. However, neuroscience offers several plausible explanations. When the brain is deprived of oxygen, its normal functioning is disrupted. The visual cortex, especially when oxygen levels drop, can produce tunnel-like effects as peripheral vision fades. A sudden release of endorphins or neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine can generate sensations of euphoria and comfort. The limbic system, which governs emotion and memory, may also become hyperactive, explaining the life review phenomenon. In some cases, chemicals naturally produced by the brain, such as DMT, are proposed to play a role, generating dreamlike hallucinations during trauma. Cardiac arrest provides a useful window into these events. When the heart stops, blood flow to the brain ceases within seconds. Brain activity begins to decline, but it does not stop instantly. EEG studies have shown that in some cases, there is a brief surge of organized brain activity just before or after clinical death. This burst may account for the coherent, immersive nature of near-death experiences. Rather than being random or chaotic, the brain's final moments might create one last vivid state of awareness. One of the most ambitious efforts to study near-death experiences under controlled conditions was the AWARE study, led by Dr. Sam Parnia. This international project placed visual targets in hospital rooms, images visible only from a vantage point above the patient. The idea was that if someone truly had an out-of-body experience and floated above the room, they might see and report the hidden image. While the study collected hundreds of accounts, very few patients reached the necessary medical criteria, and no one reported seeing the targets. The study did, however, confirm that some patients had coherent mental activity during periods when brain function was expected to be minimal. It's worth noting that near-death experiences are not limited to actual death events. People undergoing trauma, fainting, intense meditation, or certain drug experiences report similar visions. Pilots subjected to extreme G-forces during training have described tunnel vision and euphoria. This suggests that the phenomena may not require the soul to leave the body, but rather emerge from specific neurobiological conditions. Yet for those who experience them, the impact is often profound. People who survive near-death experiences frequently report changes in outlook, reduced fear of death, increased compassion, or a sense of purpose. Whether or not the experience reflects a true passage into another realm, it seems to open something within the person. In this way, it shares qualities with powerful dreams or spiritual revelations, not necessarily factual but deeply meaningful. Science cannot prove that these experiences are evidence of an afterlife, nor can it fully dismiss their emotional and psychological reality. They stand at a boundary where the measurable meets the personal, where the observable world meets the interior world of mind and memory. Perhaps near-death experiences are best understood not as answers, but as messages, signals that the human mind, even in its final moments, seeks connection, light, and continuity. Whether they reveal what comes next or only reflect what we hope for, they remind us that the threshold of death is not only a biological event, but a deeply human one. Death is often spoken of as a moment, a single point in time when life ends and something else, or nothing at all, begins. But in clinical and biological terms, death is not an instant. It is a process, complex and gradual, shaped by shifting definitions, evolving technologies, and the limits of what science can detect. Defining when someone has truly died is more difficult than it might seem, and that complexity lies at the heart of both medical ethics and philosophical debates about the soul, the self, and what it means to be gone. For centuries, the absence of breath and heartbeat marked death. A still chest, a silent heart. These were the signs by which people confirmed that life had ended. But with the advent of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, and life support technologies, those signs became reversible. A heart could be restarted. Breathing could be assisted. This forced the medical community to redefine death, not only as the cessation of cardiac and respiratory function, but as the irreversible loss of brain function. Today, in most parts of the world, Death is declared based on one of two criteria. The first is cardiopulmonary death, the permanent stopping of heart and lung activity. The second is brain death, defined as the irreversible loss of all brain activity, including in the brainstem. Brain death is legally recognized as death in many countries, even if machines continue to circulate blood and oxygen. It is confirmed through a series of neurological tests, the absence of brainstem reflexes, no spontaneous breathing, and no electrical activity on an EEG. Brain death differs from a coma or vegetative state. In those conditions, parts of the brain still function. A person in a coma may breathe independently or show signs of limited awareness. In brain death, no function remains. The brain has permanently ceased to operate, and the body, without artificial support, will soon follow. Yet because the body may still be warm, the skin still pink, this state can be emotionally difficult for families to accept. The appearance of life lingers, even when clinical signs confirm its end. This distinction has real consequences. Organ transplantation relies on brain death criteria to ethically harvest organs while they remain viable. If death were only defined by the stopping of the heart, most organs would be damaged before they could be preserved. The precision of brain death determination allows medicine to balance the needs of the dying and those in need of life-saving transplants. But the practice continues to raise questions, especially when brain activity appears to fade in unpredictable ways. There are also rare and exceptional cases that challenge our understanding. A few patients have shown minimal or delayed signs of awareness, even after periods of deep unresponsiveness. These are not instances of brain death, but of disorders of consciousness that remain poorly understood. They remind us that while medicine is precise, it is not infallible. Diagnosis depends on the tools available, and science, like the body, continues to evolve. At the cellular level, death is also not immediate. While the brain is particularly sensitive to oxygen loss, beginning to degrade within minutes, other cells in the body may survive for hours. Skin, bone, and muscle do not die the instant the heart stops. Some tissues can be preserved and even revived under certain conditions, especially with the use of hypothermia or medical suspension. This has led to ongoing research in resuscitation science and the possible extension of the window between clinical death and irreversible damage. In this light, death begins to look less like a doorway and more like a threshold, a space between states, influenced by time, temperature, biology, and context. Some researchers have even suggested that we may one day be able to reverse certain types of death, or at least extend the boundary further. While such ideas remain speculative, they highlight how the definition of death is not fixed, but dynamic. Still, there comes a point when the return is no longer possible. When cells have broken down beyond repair, when brain tissue has liquefied, when the systems that support awareness and identity have ceased entirely. That, for now, is where science draws the line. Death is not a moment, it is a series of endings, some fast, some slow. And in that fading process, we are reminded not only of biology, but of mystery. We know where the heart stops. We can measure when neurons fall silent. But what slips away? The experience, the presence, the person, that remains harder to define. To understand what might remain after death, it helps to understand what defines us in life. More than flesh and bone, more than thoughts or feelings, we are built upon memory. It is memory that gives shape to the self, binding together past, present, and future into a coherent identity. Without memory, we may breathe and move, but the thread of who we are begins to fray. And just as memory forms the core of identity, it also plays a central role in how we experience time, a sense that becomes increasingly complex and fragile near life's end. Memory is not a single function. Neuroscience divides it into several distinct systems. There is episodic memory, the recollection of specific events, like a childhood birthday or a recent conversation. There is semantic memory, facts and general knowledge, like the name of a capital city. There is procedural memory, which enables us to ride a bicycle or type without conscious thought. These systems rely on interconnected regions of the brain, especially the hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, and various areas within the medial temporal lobe. Of these, episodic memory is most closely tied to our sense of self. When we say, "I remember," we are often referring to the ability to mentally travel back in time and re-experience an event. This capacity, called autonoetic consciousness, gives rise to the feeling of continuity, the idea that we are the same person from one moment to the next. It allows us to project ourselves forward into imagined futures and backward into personal history. Disorders that disrupt memory show how deeply it is woven into identity. In Alzheimer's disease, for example, the progressive loss of episodic memory often leads to a diminishing sense of self. Loved ones become strangers, time becomes disordered, and the internal narrative begins to dissolve. Yet, even in advanced stages, traces of emotional memory may remain. A person might not recall a name, but still smile at a familiar song. This suggests that memory is layered, some parts more resilient than others. As death approaches, changes in memory and time perception often intensify. People nearing the end of life sometimes experience vivid memories from long ago, a phenomenon known as life review. These memories may emerge spontaneously, with a clarity and emotional intensity that surprises even the individual. They are not always linear. Moments from childhood, youth, and old age may appear side by side, creating a mosaic of experience rather than a timeline. Neurologically, this may be linked to shifts in brain activity as the cortex loses function and deeper memory circuits activate. Our perception of time itself is also shaped by the brain, and it is far from constant. In situations of danger or deep emotion, time may seem to slow down. In routine or distraction, it speeds up. The brain measures time through internal rhythms, oscillations of neural activity, the passage of sensory input, and the spacing of events. As the body begins to fail, these systems become unstable. For someone at the edge of death, seconds might stretch into what feels like minutes. Dreams, hallucinations, or near-death experiences can unfold with a richness that defies the clock. This leads some to speculate that the final seconds of consciousness could be extended in subjective time. If the brain experiences a flood of neural activity before shutting down, that moment might hold a lifetime of feeling. Though this remains a hypothesis, it aligns with the reports of individuals revived from near-death states, who describe elaborate visions compressed into brief intervals. These moments may be the brain's last effort to organize, reconcile, or comfort itself. Memory also survives death in another way, through others. Our stories, photos, creations, and relationships continue in the minds of those we leave behind. This is not immortality, but it is a form of persistence. Long after a voice falls silent, its echoes may still guide, comfort, or shape someone's life. In this sense, time becomes a shared fabric. A memory once formed can ripple outward, linking lives beyond its origin. The mind is not a fixed entity. It is a pattern in motion, shaped by what it remembers and how it imagines. Time, too, is not just something we measure, but something we feel. And as both begin to loosen near the end of life, the boundary between then, now, and never may blur, not in fear, but in the quiet softening of the edges of self. Science is the most powerful method humans have devised for understanding the natural world. It observes, tests, measures, and refines. Through science, we have mapped genomes, traced the origin of stars, and built machines that think. Yet when it comes to the question of what happens after death, science meets a boundary. It can tell us when life ends, what processes fail, and how the brain reacts, but it cannot reach into the subjective, unobservable realm of what might or might not follow. This boundary is not a failure of science, but a recognition of its scope. The scientific method relies on evidence, observations that are repeatable, measurable, and falsifiable. It works best with physical systems that can be manipulated and recorded. Consciousness, particularly at the moment of death, resists this framework. It is deeply private. It occurs within a person, unobservable to others except through indirect signs, verbal reports, brain scans, behaviors. Even those signs disappear at death. Once the brain ceases activity, The inner experience, if any, leaves no trace that can be examined. There are no instruments that can detect awareness beyond the cessation of brain function. This limits what science can say about life after death. It cannot confirm or deny. It can only remain silent on what lies beyond its tools. Historically, humans have not accepted that silence easily. The desire to pierce the veil between life and death has inspired both profound ideas and dubious experiments. In the early 20th century, some researchers attempted to weigh the soul. They measured people immediately before and after death, hoping to detect a sudden loss of mass. The results were inconclusive and poorly controlled, yet the idea persisted in popular imagination. Others tried to photograph spirits, using long exposure techniques and manipulated plates to create the illusion of ghostly forms. These early efforts, while lacking scientific rigor, reveal the emotional urgency behind the quest. Modern science avoids such theatrics, but remains interested in the limits of consciousness. Research into near-death experiences, dreams, and altered states of awareness seeks to understand how the brain generates profound experiences. Neuroscience offers plausible mechanisms: oxygen deprivation, neurotransmitter surges, disrupted connectivity, but these explanations do not resolve the question of whether there is anything beyond them. They only show what the brain is capable of under stress. Philosophy steps in where measurement fails. Epistemology, the study of knowledge, asks what we can truly know and how we know it. It reminds us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because science cannot detect something does not mean it does not exist, but the burden of proof still lies with those who claim it does. This creates a space of respectful uncertainty, a place where belief, experience, and humility coexist. This space is where many people find personal meaning, while science stays within the observable. Religion, spirituality, and art venture into the unobservable. They offer models of the afterlife that reflect cultural values, moral systems, and emotional needs. These models are not scientific, but they are psychologically and socially real. They shape how people grieve, how they live, and how they prepare for death. Psychologists recognize that beliefs about the afterlife can influence well-being. For many, belief in continued existence, whether as a soul, spirit, or energy, can reduce fear of death and provide comfort. Even those who do not believe in a literal afterlife often speak in symbolic terms, living on through impact, memory, or connection. These expressions bridge the gap between knowledge and hope. Mystery, in this context, is not ignorance. It is an honest acknowledgement of the limits of current understanding. It is a quiet space where science does not yet reach, and where not knowing is met with curiosity rather than despair. In that space, people turn inward. They reflect on meaning, love, and the strange, temporary nature of being alive. The line between science and mystery is not fixed. What was once unknown becomes understood. But some questions may remain out of reach, not because they are unsolvable, but because they concern experiences that cannot be repeated or measured. The first breath, the last thought, the final flicker of awareness, these may belong to a realm that science approaches but never fully enters. Still, the pursuit matters. To ask what happens after death is to ask what it means to be alive. Science can show us how life operates, but not always why we value it. And so, we explore both the measured and the immeasurable, not to resolve the unknown, but to honor its presence in our lives. Among the more speculative frontiers of science and philosophy lies the intersection of consciousness and quantum mechanics. Here, some theorists have proposed that the mysteries of the mind, its origin, its persistence, and even its possible continuation after death, might be understood through the strange principles of the quantum world. These ideas remain controversial and, as of now, unproven, but they are part of a growing effort to explore whether consciousness is more than just a byproduct of brain activity, perhaps something more fundamental, even universal. One of the most well-known hypotheses in this realm is the orchestrated objective reduction theory, or OR, proposed by physicist Sir Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Dr. Stuart Hameroff. They suggest that consciousness arises from quantum processes occurring inside the brain's neurons, specifically within structures called microtubules. Unlike the electrical signals typically associated with brain activity, these microtubules might support quantum-level events, entanglement, superposition, and collapse that somehow give rise to awareness. According to this theory, when the brain stops functioning and classical neural activity ceases, these quantum processes could potentially continue for a brief period, or even disengage from the body altogether. In this view, consciousness might not be entirely tethered to the brain's physical structure. Instead, it could be embedded in the fabric of the universe, an informational field that persists independently, much like gravity or electromagnetic force. It is important to emphasize that the Ochoa theory has not been widely accepted by the scientific community. Critics argue that the brain is too warm and biologically noisy to maintain coherent quantum states. Quantum effects are known to be delicate, often requiring extreme isolation and low temperatures to be sustained, conditions far from those found in living tissue. While some research has identified quantum behaviors in biological systems, such as photosynthesis in plants or bird navigation, no conclusive evidence has shown that such effects contribute to human consciousness. Still, the idea that the mind might tap into deeper layers of reality continues to inspire both scientific and philosophical inquiry. Beyond Ochoa, other thinkers have proposed that consciousness is not an emergent property of matter, but a fundamental component of existence. This view, often called panpsychism, holds that consciousness, in some form, exists in all things, even in particles, fields, or space itself. From this perspective, the death of the body might not eliminate consciousness but return it to a more diffuse, universal state. Another variant, rooted more in physics than metaphysics, is the idea of quantum information conservation. Just as matter and energy are never destroyed but transformed, some theorists suggest that information itself may be indestructible. In black hole physics, for example, the principle of unitarity suggests that information swallowed by a black hole is not lost, but encoded in the event horizon or radiated back over time. If consciousness is a form of quantum information, could it also persist in some form after biological death? These ideas, while intriguing, remain speculative. They are difficult to test and often rely on philosophical assumptions about the nature of mind and matter. Still, they highlight a crucial point. Current models of consciousness, rooted in classical physics and biology, may be incomplete. The human brain is the most complex structure known in the universe, and it may operate in ways that science has not yet fully understood. Even if these theories do not hold up under future scrutiny, they serve a purpose. They invite us to think beyond traditional boundaries, to consider that the mind may be more than its physical components. They challenge the idea that death is a full stop, suggesting instead a transition into a domain not yet charted. Science proceeds cautiously, demanding evidence, but imagination often leads inquiry, pointing toward possibilities that data may one day illuminate. Whether the quantum world contains traces of the self, or whether consciousness dissolves entirely, remains unknown. But in exploring these frontiers, we acknowledge the depth of our questions, not just about how we live, but about how we might continue in ways we do not yet understand. Time, as we typically understand it, is a sequence, past, present, future, moving forward at a steady pace. But this experience of time is not absolute. It is shaped by the brain, influenced by context, emotion, and internal rhythm. Under certain conditions, time stretches, compresses, or even seems to stop altogether. As we approach the end of life, these shifts in perception become especially important. They may shape our final moments and influence how we interpret experiences that brush against the threshold of death. Neuroscience tells us that time perception is a function of several brain regions, including the cerebellum, basal ganglia, and prefrontal cortex. These systems work together to create a sense of duration and order. However, this system is not like a clock, it is fluid. It responds to arousal, attention, and novelty. When we are frightened, for example, time may feel slower. When we are deeply engaged or distracted, it may pass unnoticed. In high-stress or life-threatening situations, the brain undergoes rapid shifts in neurochemistry. Adrenaline floods the system, memory encoding intensifies. People often report events seeming to move in slow motion, not because the world changes speed, but because their brains record more information per second. This effect may be part of the brain's survival strategy, amplifying awareness when it is most needed. This phenomenon becomes especially relevant near death. In the moments before unconsciousness, the brain may experience a concentrated burst of activity. Some researchers believe this final surge could generate a cascade of vivid experiences, rich in detail and seemingly extended in time. Although these events might last only seconds, they could feel much longer from the perspective of the individual. The subjective expansion of time may create the illusion of a drawn-out passage, even if the actual duration is brief. Reports from those who have survived cardiac arrest or other near-death events often include vivid recollections, life reviews, journeys through light, or meetings with loved ones. These experiences, compressed into mere seconds of real time, unfold like scenes from a longer story. While some interpret them as spiritual or metaphysical, neuroscience suggests that altered time perception may be a significant contributing factor. Beyond emergency scenarios, time also changes in other altered states. Dreams, meditative absorption, and psychedelic experiences. In dreams, minutes of narrative can pass in the blink of an eye. In deep meditation, time may vanish altogether. These comparisons offer insight into how the brain may function when deprived of normal input or when approaching a state of shutdown. Culturally, many afterlife traditions describe the soul's journey as unbound by earthly time. In some belief systems, the moment of death opens into a realm where time no longer applies, where eternity is not infinite duration, but timeless presence. Whether this idea arises from spiritual insight or neural architecture remains open to interpretation, but it speaks to something deeply human, the intuition that time, at the edge of life, behaves differently. As you rest now, your own sense of time may begin to shift. The external world slows. Thoughts arrive more gently. Breathing follows its own rhythm. If you do not fall asleep immediately, that is completely fine. You are entering a space where the need to measure time fades, replaced by stillness. Even in waking life, this softening of temporal awareness allows the mind to reflect, wander, and settle. Science does not claim to know what, if anything, continues beyond death, but it does offer clues about how time is experienced at the threshold. The brain, even as it prepares to shut down, may offer one final gift, a slowing, a space, a deepening moment that feels like something more. Whether this is a neurological artifact or something else entirely, it shapes how we interpret the end. Perhaps time does not end at once. Perhaps it fades, gradually, like light after sunset. And in that soft twilight of perception, where moments stretch and the self becomes quiet, there may be a sense of something continuing, not because the body persists, but because time itself offers a moment of grace. The simulation hypothesis proposes a provocative idea that everything we perceive, our bodies, our environment, even the stars above, could be part of a highly sophisticated simulation. What began as a thought experiment in philosophy has since gained traction in popular culture and theoretical science. If true, this idea could reshape not only how we understand reality, but also how we interpret death and the possibility of existence beyond the physical world we know. The modern version of the hypothesis was popularized by philosopher Nick Bostrom in 2003. He proposed that one of three statements must be true. First, civilizations never reach the level of technology needed to simulate conscious beings. Second, advanced civilizations lose interest in running such simulations. Or third, we are almost certainly living in a simulation. The reasoning is based on probability. If countless simulated worlds can be created by future civilizations, then statistically, the odds are that we are inside one of them rather than part of the original, base reality. In this framework, consciousness could be interpreted as a function within a simulated system, a stream of code running on an advanced processor, far beyond our current understanding. Our experiences, memories, and perceptions would still feel real to us, but their source would not be biological in the traditional sense. Instead, they would emerge from rules embedded in a simulated environment. This idea, while seemingly far-fetched, is grounded in familiar analogies. Video games, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence all demonstrate how digital systems can produce complex, immersive experiences. As our own simulations become more advanced, it becomes increasingly plausible to imagine a future where entire worlds, with thinking, feeling entities, could be rendered with sufficient realism to be indistinguishable from physical reality. But what would death mean in such a system? If consciousness is part of a simulation, then the cessation of bodily functions may not be the end of existence. It could represent a logout, a shutdown, or a transition to another layer of the simulation. The idea resembles some traditional spiritual views, in which the physical world is an illusion or a test, and death is a return to a more fundamental reality. This perspective raises questions about the permanence of death. If the self is encoded, then in theory, it could be restored, duplicated, or preserved. A simulation might allow for the reactivation of consciousness, the migration of minds, or even reincarnation within new environments. These possibilities echo ancient beliefs in rebirth and spiritual continuity, though framed in technological rather than metaphysical terms. Critics of the simulation hypothesis point out its limitations. It is not currently testable in any empirical way, and thus falls outside the strict boundaries of scientific method. Some argue that it merely replaces one mystery with another, shifting the question from "what is reality?" to "who created the simulation?" Others suggest that the hypothesis, while imaginative, may reflect more about human psychology, our desire for design, purpose, and structure, than about the nature of the universe. Nonetheless, the idea resonates. It offers a model in which consciousness is not bound to biology, and where existence could persist under radically different conditions. It provides a theoretical framework in which death may not be an end, but a shift in access, a return to a broader perspective, or even a reawakening elsewhere. The simulation concept also invites us to reflect on meaning. If life is simulated, does that diminish its value? Many thinkers argue the opposite, that meaning is not determined by the substrate of reality, but by the depth of experience. Whether we are made of neurons or lines of code, the joys, fears, and connections we experience are real to us. They shape our inner lives regardless of their origin. And so, the simulation hypothesis becomes not just a question about physics or philosophy, but a mirror of our longing. It reflects our wish that consciousness might be more than temporary, that the self might endure, and that behind the apparent randomness of life lies an underlying intelligence, or at least a pattern not yet fully understood. In asking whether we are simulations, we are also asking whether the self can persist outside the visible frame. Whether as soul, code, or something in between, the question remains the same. Is there more than this world? And if so, what wakes when the program ends? Among the many beliefs about what happens after death, reincarnation holds a distinct place. Unlike the idea of a permanent afterlife or final rest, reincarnation suggests continuity through return, the soul or consciousness leaving one body only to be reborn in another. Found in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and in various indigenous and esoteric traditions across the globe, this concept has also attracted scientific curiosity. Some researchers, particularly in the past century, have sought to investigate whether memories or traits from previous lives might persist into new ones. The philosophical foundation of reincarnation varies by tradition. In Hinduism and Buddhism, rebirth is tied to karma, the cumulative effect of one's actions, intentions, and thoughts. Good deeds may lead to favorable rebirths, harmful ones to more difficult lives. The cycle of death and rebirth, known as samsara, continues until the soul achieves liberation, or moksha, by shedding attachment and ignorance. In these traditions, reincarnation is not a reward or punishment system, but a process of learning and purification. Outside of formal religious systems, the idea of past lives has appeared in various forms. In the West, interest surged in the 20th century through spiritualist movements, theosophy, and New Age philosophy. Practices such as past life regression, often conducted through hypnosis, aim to retrieve memories of previous incarnations. While popular, these methods are controversial and lack rigorous scientific validation. The experiences may be influenced by suggestion, imagination, or cultural expectation rather than actual memory. More empirically oriented investigations have focused on young children who spontaneously report memories of previous lives. Since the mid-20th century, the most prominent work in this area has been conducted by researchers at the University of Virginia, notably Dr. Ian Stevenson, and later, Dr. Jim Tucker. Over several decades, they documented more than 2,500 cases from around the world, often involving children aged between 2 and 6 years old. These children typically began speaking about past lives without prompting. Some described names, places, events, and relationships from lives they claimed to have lived. In certain cases, these accounts included detailed knowledge of people or locations unknown to the child or their family. In a subset of cases, investigators found that the details corresponded with real, deceased individuals who had died before the child's birth. Skeptics offer several explanations for these phenomena. Some suggest that the information may have been acquired through overheard conversations, media exposure, or family dynamics. Others point to cryptomnesia, forgotten memories resurfacing in distorted form, or confabulation, in which the mind creates plausible narratives from fragments of experience. Cultural reinforcement may also play a role, as many of the strongest cases come from regions where belief in reincarnation is common. Nonetheless, some cases remain difficult to explain by conventional means. In a few instances, children exhibited behaviors, phobias, or preferences that aligned with the personality or circumstances of the previous individual they claimed to have been. Some showed birthmarks or physical features said to correspond with injuries or conditions of the deceased. While these correlations are anecdotal and not definitive proof, they continue to provoke interest and debate. From a neurological standpoint, mainstream science holds that memory is encoded in the brain. Once the brain ceases to function, the physical substrate of memory degrades and disappears. Therefore, the transfer of memory across lives would imply mechanisms not yet understood. If reincarnation were true in a literal sense, it would require a new framework for understanding consciousness, identity, and the continuity of information beyond biological systems. Still, these stories hold emotional power. For families, especially those grieving a child or relative, the idea of return offers comfort. For individuals who feel an unexplainable sense of familiarity with people, places, or periods in history, reincarnation provides a narrative that connects these impressions to something larger. Whether reincarnation reflects a metaphysical truth, a psychological phenomenon, or a cultural construct, it invites reflection on the nature of identity. What makes us who we are? Is it memory, personality, biology, or something more? If part of us continues, what part is it, and where does it go? Reincarnation, like many afterlife concepts, does not insist on certainty. Instead, it offers a possibility that death is not a wall, but a turning wheel, and that somewhere, somehow, the story might begin again, not as a repeat, but as a continuation, shaped by everything that came before. While near-death experiences are often described by those who have been close to death themselves, there is another category of reports that comes from people who were not dying, but were present when someone else was. These are known as shared death experiences, or SDEs, and they offer a compelling window into how the mind responds not just to one's own mortality, but to the passage of another. Shared death experiences are relatively rare but striking. They typically occur when a person is physically or emotionally close to someone who is actively dying. The person witnessing the death might report sudden sensations, a sense of leaving their body, seeing a bright light or tunnel, hearing music, or feeling as if they are accompanying the dying person partway through their transition. Some describe visions of deceased relatives or spiritual beings. Others recall experiencing a profound sense of peace, expansion, or timelessness. These accounts share several characteristics with near-death experiences, including the perception of a boundary being crossed and a sensation of elevation or movement. But what makes them unique is that they happen to people who are otherwise healthy and awake, often with no expectation of having such an experience. The implication is that death, in some cases, may generate a field of perception that affects those nearby, or that the bonds between individuals may play a role in creating a shared psychological or emotional space. The phenomenon has been systematically studied by researchers such as Dr. Raymond Moody, who first coined the term shared death experience, and William Peters, founder of the Shared Crossing Project. Peters has collected and analyzed hundreds of such reports, identifying consistent features across different demographics, cultural backgrounds, and religious beliefs. His findings suggest that these experiences are not hallucinations or grief responses alone, but structured events with recurring patterns. Science approaches shared death experiences cautiously. Skeptics argue that they may be the result of stress, suggestibility, or emotional overload during a powerful and often traumatic moment. The brain, when confronted with the imminent loss of a loved one, might activate internal processes that mirror those found in personal near-death experiences, perhaps through the mirror neuron system, which is involved in empathy and emotional resonance. Another possibility is that the experiences are forms of dissociation, a psychological mechanism that distances the self from overwhelming events. In moments of intense emotion, some individuals may enter altered states of consciousness, leading to visions or sensations that feel real but originate internally. The brain, in trying to protect the mind, may generate meaningful imagery that provides comfort or context. Still, these explanations do not fully account for the specificity of some reports. In rare cases, people have claimed to see events or individuals at a distance, such as witnessing the moment of death of a loved one who was in another location. These reports are anecdotal and difficult to verify, but they add to the intrigue surrounding shared death phenomena. From a cultural and psychological perspective, shared death experiences may reflect the deep interconnectedness between individuals. Human beings are highly social animals. Our brains are wired for empathy, synchronization, and emotional mirroring. The death of someone close can activate not only grief, but a powerful awareness of our own mortality and the fragility of life. The shared experience may be an expression of that connection, a final act of presence, where two minds, briefly, overlap. For those who report them, shared death experiences are often life-changing. They reduce fear of death, increase belief in continued existence, and deepen the sense of spiritual or existential meaning. Even when not interpreted literally, these moments are remembered as sacred, peaceful, and transformative. As with many phenomena surrounding death, shared death experiences may never be fully explained by science. But they remind us that dying is not always a solitary act. Sometimes, those who remain are drawn close, not just emotionally, but perceptually, into the mystery of departure. Whether these experiences are evidence of a deeper reality or the mind's final gift of connection, they speak to something enduring, the profound bond between human beings, and the possibility that, at the edge of life, that bond may transcend what we think of as separate selves. Death raises countless questions, many of which reach beyond the grasp of science. But within the boundary of life, the final transition, and the moments surrounding it, there are things that science can measure, quantities we can observe, patterns we can track, and phenomena we can replicate. Understanding these measurable elements helps clarify what is physically happening when someone dies, and what is happening in the minds and bodies of those still alive. At its core, the medical definition of death depends on clear biological markers. The most commonly observed are the cessation of heartbeat and breathing. When these functions stop and cannot be restarted, the body begins to shut down. This is cardiopulmonary death, the oldest and most intuitive definition. In modern medicine, however, a more precise standard has emerged: brain death. This is defined as the irreversible cessation of all brain activity, including the brainstem, which controls essential reflexes like breathing, pupil response, and gag reflexes. Brain death is now recognized as legal death in many parts of the world, and it provides a more stable basis for ethical decisions such as organ donation. The tools used to determine brain death are specific and rigorous. Electroencephalograms, EEGs, are used to detect brain waves, while blood flow tests and reflex checks confirm the absence of neural activity. These methods are not speculative, they are objective, repeatable, and widely accepted by medical professionals. They allow doctors to identify the precise point at which consciousness, sensation, and integrated biological function have ceased. But they can only measure what the instruments are designed to detect: physical and electrical signals, not subjective experience. In addition to diagnosing death, science can measure phenomena that occur during the dying process. For example, in the minutes following cardiac arrest, researchers have observed residual brain activity in some patients. In rare cases, EEGs have shown a brief surge of organized neural firing, possibly the brain's last attempt to process or preserve information. These signals usually fade quickly, but they suggest that consciousness might not end instantly when the heart stops. Such observations fuel ongoing studies into near-death experiences, memory, and time perception during extreme physiological states. Another area of measurement concerns the physical changes that accompany death. Core body temperature begins to fall, blood settles by gravity, and skin becomes pale. These changes follow predictable timelines, known as mortis stages: algor mortis, cooling; livor mortis, discoloration; and rigor mortis, stiffening. These markers help forensic scientists estimate time of death and reconstruct the circumstances around it. While seemingly clinical, these details offer insight into the body's natural progression out of life. Psychological data is also measurable, especially concerning people who have encountered death closely through medical emergencies, caregiving, or grief. Surveys and structured interviews allow researchers to collect subjective reports about near-death experiences, dreams of the deceased, or feelings of presence after a loss. While these accounts cannot be physically verified, their consistency across cultures and populations gives them credibility as psychological phenomena. They reveal how the human brain responds to death, not only in the dying, but in those left behind. Recent advances in neuroimaging have opened new possibilities for measuring the boundaries of consciousness. Functional MRI and positron emission tomography, PET scans, can detect metabolic activity and blood flow in the brain, even in patients in comas or vegetative states. These tools have revealed that some individuals diagnosed as unconscious may still show patterns of awareness, especially in response to voices or commands. This has implications for end-of-life care and the ethical management of brain injuries. Importantly, scientific measurement also respects its own limits. While we can detect electrical activity, metabolic rates, and reflexes, we cannot yet measure subjective experience directly. We do not have tools to detect a soul, if such a thing exists. We cannot observe what a person sees, feels, or becomes in their final moments. These are domains science approaches indirectly, through inference, consistency, and accumulated data. Still, what science can measure matters. It provides clarity in moments of uncertainty. It informs medical practice, protects ethical decision-making, and enhances our understanding of life's final chapter. And while it may not answer every question, it offers something valuable: the confidence to say what is known, and the humility to recognize what is not. Measurement grounds us. It gives form to mystery, even when it cannot dissolve it. And in the quiet space where numbers stop and awareness fades, we find the edge of the measurable, where life ends and something else, named or not, begins. For all that science can observe, map, and measure, there are limits to what it may ever be able to know. These limits are not simply practical, due to tools we haven't built or data we haven't gathered, but fundamental. Some questions may lie outside the scope of empirical inquiry, not because they are unimportant, but because they are built on experiences, assumptions, or conditions that resist replication and observation. At the heart of the afterlife question lies one of these limits: subjective experience. Science excels at studying the observable. It can chart the behavior of atoms, track the orbit of planets, or record the electrical pulses of the brain. But consciousness, the inner life of thought, feeling, and awareness, remains elusive. We know that it exists. Each of us experiences it firsthand. But we cannot observe another person's consciousness directly. We can only infer its presence from behavior, speech, or brain activity. This is known in philosophy as the problem of other minds. While we assume that other people are conscious, just as we are, there is no objective method to confirm it. The same problem arises when we ask whether animals are conscious, or computers, or any system more complex than it appears. When death enters the picture, the issue becomes even more pronounced. Once the brain ceases function, whatever experience may occur, if any, becomes inaccessible. There is no way to record it, no mechanism to play it back, no path to verify what happens in those final moments or beyond. Some questions compound the problem. Is there a soul? Can awareness persist without a body? Do we continue in another form? These questions cannot be answered through laboratory instruments or statistical analysis. They rely on concepts that are either metaphysical, outside the physical, or so deeply personal that they cannot be separated from emotion, language, or belief. This does not mean they are meaningless. On the contrary, they are among the most profound and enduring human questions. But it does mean that science, which depends on testability and repeatability, may never fully address them. The afterlife, if it exists, is not a phenomenon that can be summoned at will or brought into the scope of a controlled experiment. It is not reproducible. It is not falsifiable. As such, it falls outside the boundaries of science, into the domain of philosophy, spirituality, and personal reflection. Even within science itself, there are theoretical boundaries. In physics, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle places a limit on how precisely we can know certain properties of particles. In mathematics, Gödel's incompleteness theorems prove that within any given logical system, there are truths that cannot be proven using the system's own rules. In quantum theory, the act of measurement itself alters the system being observed. These are not gaps in knowledge that can be filled, but structural constraints built into the nature of reality. It is possible that the question of what happens after death belongs to a similar category, not just an unanswered question but an unanswerable one, at least from within the frame of scientific observation. This does not stop inquiry, nor should it. Exploration matters, even when it yields no conclusion. But it does call for humility, a willingness to accept the unknown as part of the human condition. And in that space of not knowing, people turn to other forms of understanding. Religion, myth, and poetry have long addressed what science cannot. They offer models of what might lie beyond, shaped not by data, but by longing, fear, love, and imagination. They reflect our deepest concerns, not just about whether we continue after death, but about what it means to live a meaningful life before it. Even among scientists, the recognition of limits is not a defeat, but an acknowledgement of perspective. Just as the microscope reveals what the naked eye cannot, there may be realms that no instrument can reach. Consciousness, death, and the possibility of something beyond may belong to such a realm, not imaginary, but beyond current modes of verification. Perhaps then some truths are not the kind we solve, but the kind we carry, quietly, respectfully, without certainty, but also without the need for it. In the end, the line between what we can know and what we likely never will is not a wall. It is a horizon. And beyond that horizon, the questions continue to echo, not waiting to be answered, but simply to be heard. Every night, the mind releases its grip on the waking world and drifts inward, into sleep. In that state, we experience strange and vivid realities, scenes that bend time, summon the past, and blend fact with imagination. Dreams allow the dead to visit us, the past to resurface, and symbols to speak in place of words. In exploring what might happen after death, we must also consider what occurs when consciousness lets go temporarily. Sleep and dreaming offer insight, not only into how the brain processes life and loss, but into how people interpret death itself. Sleep is a complex biological process governed by cycles. Each night, the body moves through stages: light sleep, deep sleep, and rapid eye movement, REM sleep. It is during REM that the most vivid dreams occur. In this phase, the brain becomes highly active, similar in pattern to wakefulness, yet the body remains still, paralyzed by a temporary mechanism that prevents us from acting out our dreams. This paradox, an active brain in a motionless body, is a defining feature of REM sleep, and it provides a glimpse into how the mind can simulate reality without external input. In REM sleep, the brain activates emotional centers, memory networks, and visual processing areas, while reducing logical control. This results in dreams that can feel meaningful and immersive. Some are surreal, others deeply emotional. One common category is the visitation dream, a type in which a deceased loved one appears, often bringing comfort, guidance, or a sense of presence. These dreams tend to stand out from ordinary ones. People often report that they feel more real, more coherent, and more emotionally powerful. From a neurological perspective, visitation dreams may arise from grief processing. The brain consolidates memories during sleep, especially emotional ones. In the case of loss, the mind may work through the absence by simulating presence. This is not deception, it is integration. The dream provides a space for continuing a relationship that has changed form. Even though the person is gone, the emotional bond persists, and the dream becomes a vessel for that bond to express itself. Culturally, these dreams are often interpreted not as memory but as communication. In many traditions, sleep is a liminal state, a place where the living and the dead may briefly meet. In ancient Greece, dreams were seen as messages from the underworld. In indigenous cultures across the Americas and Australia, dreams are considered part of a larger spiritual reality, where ancestors guide and protect the living. Whether symbolic or literal, these interpretations reflect a long-standing belief that sleep is not entirely bound to the body. There is also the phenomenon of sleep paralysis, in which a person becomes aware before full muscle control returns. This can result in vivid hallucinations, feelings of presence, pressure on the chest, or visions of figures in the room. Though explained neurologically as a mismatch between REM processes and waking consciousness, such episodes have historically been associated with spirits, ghosts, or out-of-body states. Again, biology and belief intersect in powerful ways. Lucid dreaming, in which the dreamer becomes aware of dreaming and may influence the dream's content, further blurs the boundary between internal and external experience. Some practitioners use lucid dreams to engage with questions of mortality, to simulate encounters with death, or to seek insight. While such practices are not scientific tools, they highlight the brain's capacity to create internally generated experiences that carry deep meaning. As you drift into rest now, your own mind may begin this quiet journey. Sleep will ease your thoughts, soften the edges of memory, and open the door to a private world. If you do not fall asleep right away, that is completely fine. Simply allow yourself to be still. The same brain that asks questions by day will continue to explore at night, weaving images, emotions, and moments into dreams only you can enter. Sleep is not death, but it is a rehearsal in stillness, a retreat from the outer world into the inner. In its rhythms and shadows, we glimpse how the mind creates continuity, even in the absence of wakeful awareness. Whether these night journeys touch something beyond, or simply reflect what lives within, they remind us that consciousness does not always need light to move. Sometimes, it wanders best in the dark. The desire to communicate with the dead is as old as death itself. Across cultures and centuries, people have sought to bridge the gap between the living and those who have passed on. From ancient oracles and temple rituals to modern seances and psychic readings, the hope has remained the same, that the departed might still speak, still know, and still care. This longing has given rise to mediums, individuals who claim to receive messages from those who have crossed over, and to systems and rituals designed to make contact possible. In ancient times, communication with the dead was often embedded in religious structures. In Egypt, priests interpreted dreams and signs believed to be messages from ancestors. In Greece, oracles such as those at Delphi entered trance states to deliver insights from spirits. In China, ancestral tablets, incense, and written petitions formed part of a long tradition of ongoing relationships with the deceased. These practices were not considered paranormal. They were integrated into everyday spiritual life. The modern idea of mediumship took shape in the 19th century, particularly during the rise of the spiritualist movement in Europe and North America. Spiritualism held that the soul survives death and that communication between worlds was not only possible but natural. Mediums held seances, used tools like spirit boards or automatic writing, and delivered messages from the dead to grieving families. The movement gained popularity during times of collective loss, especially after major wars, when many sought solace and closure. Scientific interest in mediumship also grew during this period. Psychical research societies in England and the United States conducted controlled studies to determine whether mediums were genuine or deceptive. Some mediums were exposed as frauds, using tricks, cold reading, and manipulation to appear convincing. Others left investigators uncertain. Despite numerous investigations, no medium has ever been conclusively proven to access information beyond what could be explained by chance, research, or suggestion. In the 20th and 21st centuries, studies have continued in parapsychology. Organizations like the Windbridge Research Center have conducted double-blind trials with trained mediums, attempting to eliminate sensory cues and ensure objective evaluation. While some findings suggest statistically significant results, critics point to issues with methodology, small sample sizes, and the difficulty of ruling out subtle forms of bias or information leakage. The scientific community remains largely skeptical, not because of malice, but because mediumship claims lack the kind of replication and falsifiability that science requires. Yet for many people, the value of a medium's message is not in proof, but in meaning. Whether or not the information is objectively verifiable, the experience of hearing from a loved one, even symbolically, can offer comfort and healing. It may help a grieving person process loss, reconnect with memories, or find emotional resolution. The psychological impact of belief can be profound, regardless of the source. There are also psychological explanations for why mediums and their clients often believe in the authenticity of messages. The human brain is wired to find patterns, interpret vague statements as personally relevant, a phenomenon known as the Barnum effect, and remember hits while forgetting misses. When emotionally vulnerable, people may become more suggestible, more willing to attribute meaning to coincidence, or to interpret ambiguity as intention. Still, not all experiences with mediums are easily dismissed. Some individuals report receiving highly specific details that seem beyond ordinary inference. These anecdotes, while compelling, remain isolated and difficult to investigate systematically. They form a fringe area where science meets story and where belief often moves ahead of evidence. The existence of fraudulent or mistaken mediums does not disprove all claims, nor does the lack of empirical confirmation prove that all experiences are false. What remains clear is that mediumship fulfills a deep psychological and social function. It allows for conversation when silence has fallen. It offers ritual where closure is elusive. It reaffirms the possibility that love might speak, even across the boundary of death. Whether messages from beyond come from spirit, memory, or imagination, they remind us of something essential, that our connections do not always end when breath does. In reaching for the dead, we reveal how deeply the living still feel, still hope, and still listen. For most of human history, beliefs about the afterlife were rooted in religion, myth, and mystery. But in the last century, and especially in recent decades, a new set of possibilities has emerged, not from temples or scriptures, but from laboratories, data centers, and digital platforms. Technology, once concerned only with the physical world, now reaches into questions traditionally reserved for philosophy. Some scientists, engineers, and futurists are beginning to ask, can technology preserve the self? Can it extend life, or even replicate it? Might we, one day, simulate an afterlife? The idea is not purely speculative. Already, many people leave behind vast amounts of digital information, photos, videos, voice recordings, messages, search histories, and social media profiles. These data footprints have become so extensive that companies and researchers have begun using them to create digital representations of the deceased. These are often called grief bots, or legacy avatars, artificial intelligence programs trained on a person's texts, emails, and voice recordings, designed to mimic their conversational style and personality. One of the earliest and most public examples came in 2016, when a South Korean television program used virtual reality to reunite a grieving mother with a digital recreation of her deceased daughter. The experience, though emotionally intense, demonstrated how immersive technology could simulate presence, memory, and even touch. More recently, startups have emerged offering digital immortality services, promising to preserve an individual's voice, mannerisms, and life story for future generations. At the more speculative end of the spectrum lies the idea of mind uploading, the theoretical process of scanning, mapping, and transferring a person's consciousness into a digital substrate. The idea is that, with sufficient detail and computational power, the brain's structure and function could be replicated in software, creating a conscious digital entity. This concept has been explored in science fiction for decades, but some transhumanist thinkers believe it may eventually be possible, provided that the mind is entirely the product of physical processes that can be copied. Critics, however, raise numerous objections. First, the technical challenges are immense. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons and trillions of synaptic connections. Mapping and modeling this with enough fidelity to preserve identity is far beyond current capabilities. More fundamentally, there is the philosophical question. Even if a perfect copy could be created, would it be you, or would it be a convincing imitation, an echo, not a continuation? Others point to ethical concerns. Who would own a digital consciousness? Could it be turned off? Could it suffer? Would such entities have rights, or be treated as tools? These questions are not just theoretical. As AI systems become more sophisticated and lifelike, the line between simulation and experience becomes harder to draw. There are also psychological implications. For the bereaved, interacting with a digital replica of a loved one may offer comfort or prolong grief. Some find solace in the idea that a person's voice and face can live on in some form. Others feel disturbed by the artificiality of the interaction, sensing that something essential is missing. The emotional experience may depend not on the technology itself, but on the expectations and needs of the user. Still, technology's reach continues to grow. In neuroscience, brain-computer interfaces are being developed to restore movement and communication to people with paralysis. In aging research, efforts are underway to slow or reverse cellular decline. In virtual reality, environments are being created to simulate sacred spaces, memorials, or imagined afterlives. While these tools do not replace belief or biology, they reshape how we interact with memory, identity, and legacy. Perhaps the most profound implication of this technological turn is not whether we can create an afterlife, but whether we are changing what we mean by one. Traditional views focus on the soul, spirit, or essence continuing in another realm. Technological versions focus on continuity of data, pattern, and simulation. One speaks to the sacred, the other to the replicable. Whether these efforts represent true continuation or symbolic preservation remains an open question. What they reveal is our persistent drive to outlast death, to record, remember, and rebuild. In this way, technology becomes a new kind of ritual, a modern response to an ancient fear. The digital realm may never replace the mysteries of the unseen, but it adds a new chapter to the story of how we imagine life after death. Not in clouds or temples, but in circuits, screens, and code, we seek to hold on, not forever, but a little longer. Not every vision of life after death imagines a spiritual realm or a continued consciousness. For many people, the most enduring form of existence after death is found in legacy, the ways in which a person's life continues to shape the world long after they are gone. Through memory, influence, and connection, the self may persist, not in mystery, but in measurable and meaningful ways. Legacy can take many forms. It may be genetic, passed down through children and grandchildren. Our DNA carries instructions not only for physical traits, but for biological tendencies, risks, and strengths. Each person is a living mosaic of their ancestors, a continuation of biological lines that reach back through generations. In this way, life does not end, it transforms, carried forward in the bodies and cells of others. But legacy extends beyond biology. Culture, language, values, and habits are transmitted across time through social learning. A story told to a child, a recipe passed down, a gesture of kindness repeated. These are threads of identity that survive death. In psychology, the term transgenerational memory describes how behaviors and beliefs persist within families and communities, shaping outlooks long after the original source is gone. Memories also play a powerful role. When we recall someone who has died, we reanimate them in thought. Their words, their laughter, their presence return, even if only for a moment. These memories can influence decisions, comfort us in difficulty, or simply remind us who we are. Neuroscience shows that remembering activates many of the same brain regions involved in perceiving reality. In this sense, memory is not just mental storage, it is a form of continued experience. Legacy can also be professional or creative. The inventions of scientists, the works of artists, the teachings of mentors, all ripple forward. Ideas take on lives of their own, influencing people the originator will never meet. This idea is reflected in Richard Dawkins' concept of the meme, which refers to a unit of cultural transmission. Unlike a gene, a meme spreads not through biology but through imitation, learning, and communication. Some ideas survive for centuries, shaping entire societies. In this way, the mind leaves traces that extend well beyond the body. Even small, seemingly ordinary actions can become part of legacy. A moment of patience, a kind word, or a lesson shared may be remembered and passed on in ways the original person never imagined. This quiet continuity forms the basis of human culture, community, and resilience. Rituals of remembrance help reinforce legacy. Funerals, memorials, anniversaries, and holidays keep names and stories alive. Gravestones, photographs, digital tributes all serve as anchors for memory. In many cultures, honoring the dead is not just a sign of respect, but a way of maintaining social and emotional continuity. The person may be physically gone, but their presence endures in symbol, word, and act. There is also growing interest in digital legacy. As people store more of their lives online, through messages, social media, videos, and voice recordings, they leave behind vast archives that can be revisited and reshaped. Families now curate digital memorials. Some use artificial intelligence to simulate conversations with the deceased. While these technologies raise ethical and philosophical questions, they also reflect an old truth in new form: the desire to remain present for those we love. Legacy is not always conscious or chosen. Sometimes, we influence others in ways we never realize. A teacher's encouragement may shape a student's life. A stranger's kindness may ripple outward. The effects of our lives, like waves in a pond, extend farther than we can see. This makes legacy not just a personal matter, but a shared one. We are shaped by others, and we shape others in turn. In the face of death, this perspective offers quiet comfort. It suggests that a person's existence is not limited to a set of years or a physical body. Instead, it continues, diffused, distributed, and woven into the lives of others. Legacy does not claim to be proof of an afterlife, but it is evidence of continuity, connection, and influence beyond the moment of death. To live, then, is not only to breathe and act, but to leave something behind. A thought, a gesture, a memory that persists. In this way, the self does not simply vanish, it transforms. It becomes part of the greater human story, carried onward in ways we may never fully know. Belief in the afterlife is nearly universal across cultures and epochs, yet the reasons for it are as varied as the people who hold it. While theology and tradition often explain what people believe about what comes after death, psychology asks a different question. Why do people believe it at all? What internal needs, cognitive patterns, or emotional drives support such belief, especially in the absence of concrete evidence? One key psychological factor is existential anxiety. Human beings are among the few animals capable of reflecting on their own mortality. We know that life ends, that our time is finite, and that death is inevitable. This awareness can generate fear, sadness, and a deep sense of vulnerability. Belief in an afterlife, whether as heaven, reincarnation, or spiritual continuation, helps to buffer this anxiety by offering a sense of permanence, meaning, or reunion. Terror management theory, a framework developed by psychologists in the 1980 seconds, explores how awareness of death shapes behavior. It suggests that when people are reminded of their mortality, they cling more tightly to their cultural worldviews, including religious beliefs and moral systems. These structures provide a symbolic sense of immortality, allowing individuals to feel that they are part of something enduring. In this light, belief in the afterlife serves a powerful psychological purpose. It helps maintain emotional stability in the face of the unknown. Memory also plays a role. When someone close to us dies, the brain does not immediately update its internal model. The routines, associations, and emotional patterns remain intact. People often report feeling as though the deceased is still present, walking into a room expecting to see them, dreaming about them, or hearing their voice in their minds. These experiences can feel so vivid that they seem to point to continued existence rather than mere memory. Psychologically, these experiences may arise from the brain's attachment systems. Humans form strong emotional bonds, especially with those who provide love, safety, or identity. When such a bond is severed by death, the brain seeks continuity. In doing so, it may interpret internal cues, memories, dreams, intuitive feelings as signs of presence. This is not necessarily irrational. Rather, it reflects how the mind copes with loss by creating patterns that preserve connection. Cognitive science also explores the tendency toward dualism, the intuitive belief that the mind and body are separate. Children across cultures often believe that thoughts, feelings, or intentions can exist independently of the physical body. This may explain why afterlife beliefs arise spontaneously in many societies, even without formal religious instruction. If the mind feels like something distinct from the body, it becomes easier to imagine that it might continue after the body stops. Related to this is teleological thinking, the tendency to see purpose and design in events. This mode of thought supports the idea that life and death have meaning, that people die for a reason, or that their journey continues beyond this world. While science focuses on causality and mechanism, the human brain is drawn to narrative and purpose. Afterlife beliefs offer closure to the story of a life, suggesting that it moves forward into a new chapter. Social influence also plays a role. Belief is not formed in isolation. It is shaped by community, culture, and upbringing. If a person grows up in a society where afterlife beliefs are common, they are more likely to adopt similar views. These beliefs are reinforced through rituals, stories, and shared experiences. They become part of a person's identity and worldview, making them resistant to doubt even in the face of conflicting evidence. Importantly, belief in the afterlife does not always correlate with religiousness. Surveys show that many people who identify as non-religious still believe in some form of continuation after death. This suggests that the psychological need for meaning, connection, and hope transcends doctrine. It points to a human need that is not only emotional but cognitive, an attempt to reconcile what is known with what is felt. Understanding the psychology of belief does not invalidate those beliefs. It simply offers a framework for understanding why they arise and why they endure. In this way, psychology does not seek to disprove the afterlife, but to explore the mind that imagines it. To believe is human, to hope is natural, and to seek meaning in death, as in life, is one of the deepest expressions of our conscious awareness. Among the many visions of life after death, one of the most enduring is the idea of eternal return, that existence is not linear but cyclical. This concept appears in both philosophy and mythology, and suggests that life, death, and rebirth are not endpoints but recurring stages in an infinite loop. Unlike traditional Western views of a one-time journey to heaven or a single reincarnation into a new life, eternal return imagines the same life happening again and again, forever. In ancient civilizations, cyclical time was a central concept. The Babylonians, Mayans, and Hindus All envisioned time not as a straight line, but as a circle, days repeated in rhythms. Seasons returned. Generations came and went in patterns that mirrored the past. In Hindu cosmology, for example, time is measured in vast epochs called yugas, which rotate like wheels. Life and death are merely phases in a cycle that has neither a beginning nor an end. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche took this idea further, proposing a thought experiment. What if, at the moment of your death, you were told that you would live the exact same life again, every moment, every joy, every sorrow, on repeat, eternally? He called this idea the eternal recurrence. It was not a literal belief in reincarnation, but a challenge to live in such a way that one would willingly relive their life forever. In this sense, it was both a metaphysical proposition and a moral test. In modern times, science does not support the literal repetition of individual lives, but physics does recognize cycles at cosmic scales. Stars are born, burn, and explode, seeding the universe with elements that form new stars. Galaxies collide and reform. Planets emerge from dust, only to be pulled back into entropy. Some cosmological models, like the oscillating universe theory, even propose that the universe expands and contracts in cycles. Though this remains speculative, biology, too, reflects this rhythm. Cells die and are replaced. Species emerge and go extinct. Ecosystems collapse and regenerate. From the turning of the earth to the breathing of lungs, life is built on cycles. Death, in this context, is not an interruption but a necessary part of renewal. This biological repetition echoes the symbolic meaning found in myths of eternal return. What ends is never fully lost, only transformed. In many spiritual traditions, reincarnation is a form of return. In Buddhism, the cycle of rebirth, called samsara, continues until a person attains enlightenment and escapes the wheel. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes the intermediate state, or bardo, in which the consciousness transitions between lives. In this worldview, life is not a one-time occurrence, but a chapter in an ongoing journey shaped by karma and consciousness. Psychologically, the idea of return may offer comfort. It suggests that mistakes can be corrected, relationships renewed, and growth continued. Rather than facing an end, the soul, or identity, has another chance. This belief can ease the fear of death and encourage ethical living. It also invites reflection. If you were to live again, would you live the same way? Even in non-spiritual contexts, people often experience life as cyclical. Emotions return in patterns. History repeats itself. Personal growth spirals through similar challenges, approached from deeper levels each time. This internal sense of recurrence may make the concept of eternal return feel intuitive, even without formal belief. Still, there are questions. If we return, are we the same person, or someone new with echoes of the past? If consciousness resets, is the self truly continuous? And if life repeats without memory, what is gained or learned? These philosophical puzzles remain unresolved, but they illuminate the deep human need to believe that life is not wasted, not accidental, and not isolated. The dream of eternal return may never be proven or disproven, but as a metaphor, it offers something profound, the idea that existence is not a fall into darkness, but a dance of light and shadow that continues. A rhythm that plays on, through form and formlessness, again and again. Near-death experiences, or NDEs, are among the most widely reported and compelling phenomena linked to the idea of an afterlife. Described by individuals who have come close to death and then returned, these accounts often include remarkably similar elements: a sense of leaving the body, moving through a tunnel, encountering a brilliant light, meeting deceased loved ones, undergoing a life review, and feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. Some interpret these events as glimpses of the afterlife. Others seek explanations grounded in brain function and psychology. The term near-death experience was popularized in the 1970 seconds by psychiatrist Dr. Raymond Moody, whose book Life After Life compiled hundreds of such stories. Since then, NDEs have been reported around the world, across cultures, religions, and belief systems. While the content of these experiences may vary in detail, the core features, detachment from the body, heightened perception, and feelings of transcendence, appear consistently. From a neuroscientific perspective, several hypotheses attempt to explain these vivid phenomena. One of the most prominent involves anoxia, or lack of oxygen to the brain. When the heart stops and blood flow ceases, brain cells begin to die. In the early stages of this shutdown, unusual patterns of electrical activity can occur, especially in the visual cortex and temporal lobes, regions associated with sight, memory, and emotion. This might account for tunnel vision, bright lights, and a cascade of personal images. Another hypothesis centers on neurotransmitters. When the brain is under extreme stress, due to trauma, lack of oxygen, or cardiac arrest, it releases a surge of chemicals like endorphins, serotonin, and dopamine. These can produce euphoria, dissociation, and a sense of floating or unity. Additionally, the dying brain may enter a hyperstimulated state, giving rise to perceptions that feel more real than reality itself. Studies using electroencephalography, EEG, in animal models have shown that in the moments following cardiac arrest, brain activity can actually spike, briefly increasing in intensity before fading. In 2013, a study at the University of Michigan observed that rats exhibited a burst of synchronized brain activity in the moments just after their hearts stopped. This suggests that the dying brain may produce heightened conscious experiences as it shuts down. There are also psychological explanations. The brain may construct NDEs as a coping mechanism, a final act of the mind to soothe the individual facing death. The tunnel may represent the narrowing of visual fields. The life review could be an accelerated retrieval of autobiographical memory, initiated by trauma. Encounters with deceased loved ones may arise from deeply ingrained memories or emotional desires surfacing under stress. Despite these scientific proposals, there are aspects of NDEs that remain difficult to explain. Some individuals report experiences during periods of clinical flatline, when brain activity is not detectable. Others describe events, such as conversations or medical procedures, that were later confirmed by witnesses, despite the person being unconscious at the time. These rare cases fuel ongoing debate. Importantly, the experience of an NDE often has a lasting impact. People who undergo them frequently report a reduced fear of death, a greater sense of life's purpose, and a shift in values toward compassion and connection. These psychological changes can persist for decades, suggesting that NDEs, regardless of their origin, hold profound personal significance. Cross-cultural studies also reveal interesting patterns. While the core elements of NDEs are widespread, interpretations vary. In predominantly Christian cultures, people often report meeting angels or Jesus. In Hindu contexts, individuals may encounter messengers of Yama, the god of death. In indigenous cultures, spirits or ancestral guides appear. This suggests that cultural background shapes how the experience is remembered and narrated. The mystery of near-death experiences continues to inspire both scientific and spiritual inquiry. Are they mere artifacts of a brain in crisis, or glimpses of another reality? The current consensus in neuroscience leans toward natural explanations, but acknowledges that much is still unknown. What is clear is that NDEs reveal the brain's remarkable ability to generate vivid, meaningful experiences in its final moments. Whether they offer a preview of something beyond or a final gift of consciousness itself remains a question suspended between biology and belief. Long before the emergence of neuroscience or digital consciousness, human beings turned to philosophy to examine the possibility of life beyond death. Philosophers across cultures and centuries have debated whether the soul survives the body, whether identity can persist beyond time, and whether immortality is logically or ethically desirable. These arguments do not rely on faith or revelation, but on reason, seeking to uncover what can be known, or at least plausibly argued, about our continued existence after death. One of the earliest and most influential thinkers on the subject was Plato. In his dialogues, particularly the Phaedo, Plato argued that the soul is immortal and distinct from the body. He believed that because the soul could grasp eternal truths, Like mathematical forms or moral ideals, it must itself be eternal. For Plato, death was not an end but a release, the soul returning to a realm of pure knowledge, unshackled from the body's limitations. Plato's view was rooted in a dualist perspective, which separates the mind or soul from the physical form. Dualism has influenced Western thought for millennia, finding echoes in Christian, Islamic, and some Hindu philosophies. It suggests that even when the body dies, the essence of the person, their consciousness, moral self, or identity, continues. Later, philosophers built on or challenged these ideas. René Descartes, in the 17th century, famously declared, "Cogito, ergo sum," I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, the mind's ability to doubt its own existence proved its independence from the body. While Descartes also believed in the soul's immortality, his ideas gave rise to new discussions about what constitutes the self. Is it thought, memory, experience? Others took a more skeptical stance. David Hume, an 18th century empiricist, argued that the self is nothing more than a bundle of perceptions, constantly shifting, without a fixed core. From this view, there is no stable soul to continue after death. When the perceptions end, so does the self. Hume challenged both religious and rationalist claims of immortality, demanding evidence that could not be supplied. Still, not all arguments for immortality are religious or dualist. Some are based on the continuity of consciousness. If we can define personal identity not as a static soul, but as a pattern of experiences, thoughts, and memories, then perhaps that pattern could in theory be preserved, transferred, or even resumed. This line of thinking informs some modern discussions of digital consciousness and mind uploading, but its roots lie in older thought experiments. One such experiment is the ship of Theseus. If every part of a ship is gradually replaced, is it still the same ship? Applied to the human mind, the question becomes, if our cells, thoughts, and memories change over time, what remains the same? If continuity can persist through change in life, might it persist through change at death, especially if reconstructed? There are also moral arguments for immortality. The philosopher Immanuel Kant, while agnostic about proof, believed that belief in an afterlife was necessary to make sense of moral striving. If justice is not always achieved in this life, and virtue does not always lead to happiness, then the idea of a life beyond this one provides a framework where moral balance can be restored. In this view, immortality is not just about individual survival, it supports the ethical structure of the universe. Contemporary philosophers like Derek Parfit have further challenged the idea of a fixed, indivisible self. Parfit suggested that personal identity might not be what matters most. Instead, what matters is psychological continuity, the persistence of memories, intentions, and character traits. If these can survive, in some form, then the self might not need to be a single, unbroken entity to persist meaningfully after death. These arguments do not offer certainty. Rather, they open windows into possible ways of thinking about death and what might follow. They invite contemplation, not dogma. Philosophy does not claim to prove the afterlife, but it offers tools to examine the assumptions, definitions, and implications of belief in it. Whether one finds these arguments compelling or not, they reveal the enduring human effort to understand life's greatest boundary. Through reason, logic, and thought experiments, philosophers have tried to map a terrain that lies beyond experience, where the self might continue or dissolve into something else entirely. Sleep and death have been linked in human thought for thousands of years. In ancient Greek, the words for sleep, hypnos, and death, thanatos, were personified as twin brothers, similar in form, yet separated by permanence. This metaphor continues in language today, where people speak of eternal sleep or resting in peace. But beyond poetic analogy, there are scientific and philosophical reasons to explore the boundary between these two states of unconsciousness. Sleep is a reversible state. Each night, the brain transitions through cycles of non-REM and REM stages, engaging in processes that restore the body, consolidate memory, and regulate mood. Death, in contrast, is considered irreversible, the final cessation of biological activity, yet both involve a loss of conscious awareness, a suspension of perception, and a shift in neural activity. The comparison invites deeper questions. What happens to the mind when it goes offline? And could the study of sleep offer clues about the threshold of death? Neuroscience has revealed that sleep and death share certain pathways in the brain. Structures in the brainstem, such as the reticular activating system, are crucial for maintaining wakefulness. When these areas are damaged or deprived of oxygen, consciousness fades, either temporarily, as in sleep, or permanently, as in death. The transition into sleep is marked by a gradual slowing of brain waves and a reduction in sensory input. In dying, similar patterns can occur, though more rapidly and without return. One area of interest is the loss of self-awareness. In deep non-REM sleep, people typically report no experience at all. No thoughts, no dreams, just a blank absence. From a first-person perspective, this resembles nothingness. And yet, the sleeper wakes, with no awareness of the passage of time. This phenomenon raises a subtle philosophical question. If death is like dreamless sleep, but without awakening, what does that imply about consciousness? Sleep also features dreams, which occupy a liminal space between imagination and experience. In REM sleep, the brain can simulate vivid realities, people, places, emotions, with full immersion, often without the dreamer realizing it is not real. This ability to generate internal worlds suggests that consciousness can persist in forms disconnected from the outside world. Some theorists have speculated that if any consciousness remains after death, it might resemble an extended dream, unbound by physical input, shaped by memory, belief, or residual mental patterns. Lucid dreaming offers a particularly interesting parallel. In lucid states, the dreamer becomes aware that they are dreaming and can sometimes influence the dream. It represents a hybrid of conscious reflection and unconscious creation. If death were accompanied by a final dreamlike state, perhaps generated by a flood of neural activity or chemical release, could it be experienced as peaceful, meaningful, or even transcendent? Sleep research has also informed anesthesia science, which studies how to induce reversible unconsciousness without memory or pain. The effects of certain anesthetics mimic both deep sleep and near-death experiences. Loss of time, perception, sensations of floating, or vivid internal imagery. Understanding these mechanisms helps scientists explore how consciousness can be suspended, fragmented, or restored. Yet despite these parallels, sleep is not death. One is a temporary cycle, part of life's rhythm. The other is an end, or transformation, beyond which there is no return, at least not biologically. Still, by studying the edge of awareness in sleep, scientists learn more about how the brain transitions between states and what those states might feel like to the conscious self. From a psychological perspective, sleep may also serve as a rehearsal for letting go. It requires a surrender of control, a willingness to be carried into unknown experience. Many people fear death, but few fear sleep. This quiet trust in the natural rhythm of rest may be why the metaphor of sleep offers comfort when speaking of death. It turns the unknown into something familiar, cyclical, and peaceful. If you are listening now, perhaps while lying quietly in your bed, know that this comparison is not meant to disturb, but to soothe. Sleep is not a mirror of death. It is a daily reminder that awareness can pause, that the mind can rest, and that even in silence, something essential continues. Simply let your breathing slow, let go of thought, and allow the rhythms of rest to guide you. As technology advances, a new vision of the afterlife has entered scientific and philosophical conversation: digital immortality. Unlike spiritual beliefs grounded in metaphysics or theology, digital immortality proposes a future in which a person's mind, thoughts, memories, personality traits can be replicated, stored, and perhaps even reanimated within a computational system. It suggests that human consciousness might one day continue in digital form, raising provocative questions about identity, continuity, and the very meaning of life after death. At the heart of this idea lies the notion of mind uploading, a hypothetical process in which the complete mental content of a brain is scanned, digitized, and transferred into a non-biological substrate such as a computer, robot, or virtual environment. In theory, this uploaded mind could then think, feel, and respond just as the original person did, but without dependence on a living body. The concept is deeply speculative, but not without scientific grounding. The brain is, at one level, an information processor. It stores memories, processes, inputs, forms models of the world, and generates behavior. If every neuron and synapse could be mapped and modeled accurately, it might be possible to simulate the entire system. This idea is known as substrate-independent mind, the belief that consciousness does not require a specific material form, but can arise from the pattern and function of information processing. Efforts like the Blue Brain Project and the Human Connectome Project aim to map the architecture of the brain in exquisite detail. These initiatives involve scanning brain slices, tracing neural pathways, and building computer models of brain regions. While they have made significant progress, the complexity of the human brain remains staggering. Over 86 billion neurons, each with thousands of connections, constantly changing through experience and emotion. Even if the technical challenges of mapping and modeling the brain were overcome, many philosophical questions remain. Would the uploaded mind be you, or just a convincing copy? If your biological body dies, and a perfect replica continues in a digital space, is that truly survival, or duplication? Would you wake up in the digital world, or would a new consciousness emerge, thinking it is you? This dilemma is illustrated by the teletransportation thought experiment. If a machine scans your body, destroys it, and rebuilds you molecule by molecule elsewhere, is the person who appears at the destination the same, or merely identical? When applied to mind uploading, the same uncertainty arises. Does continuity of identity require uninterrupted consciousness, or is similarity enough? Supporters of digital immortality argue that even if the result is a copy, it may still hold value. A loved one's personality could persist, interact, and offer comfort. Individuals could continue to contribute to society, learn, or evolve within virtual environments. These minds could exist in simulated cities, digital dreamscapes, or robotic bodies, free from aging, disease, or physical limits. Skeptics point to the hard problem of consciousness, the question of how and why subjective experience arises. Even if we replicate the brain's structure, can we recreate the inner life of a person? Will a digital simulation feel joy, grief, or wonder, or merely mimic the outward expression of those states? Without clear understanding of consciousness itself, the dream of digital afterlife remains largely theoretical. There are also ethical concerns. Who would control these digital minds? Could they be turned off, altered, or replicated without consent? Would they have rights or autonomy? The prospect of eternal life in a server farm raises concerns about surveillance, control, and the commodification of identity. It may also deepen existing inequalities if such technologies are accessible only to a few. Despite these challenges, the conversation about digital immortality continues to grow. Advances in artificial intelligence, neural interfaces, and brain imaging bring the once distant vision incrementally closer. While full mind uploading may lie far in the future, if it is even possible, the mere idea shifts how we think about death, survival, and the soul. In the end, digital immortality is not just a technological question, it is a philosophical mirror. It asks us to consider what matters most about being human. Is it our thoughts, our continuity, our emotions, or something more elusive? It may never fully replace the ancient dreams of heaven or reincarnation, but it joins them as a new kind of hope, a synthetic echo of the longing to continue. Beyond individual existence, there is a different kind of continuity, one not tied to a single body or soul, but to the memory and impact we leave behind. This idea, often overlooked in discussions of the afterlife, focuses on the collective memory of humanity. It suggests that people do not merely vanish when they die. Instead, they persist through stories, influences, discoveries, and connections that ripple outward through time. From a scientific standpoint, memory is encoded in the brain through changes in synaptic strength and structure. But at a broader level, memory can be held outside the brain, in writing, in culture, in society. A photograph, a book, a building, or a teaching can transmit a person's thoughts long after their biological functions have ceased. These externalized forms of memory contribute to what the French philosopher Maurice Halbwachs called collective memory, a shared social repository of past experiences that shape identity and meaning. In this view, the afterlife is not an alternate realm, but a persistence through influence. The values a parent instills in a child, the lessons a teacher imparts to a student, the compassion shown in a single moment, all become part of the ongoing network of human experience. These memories are picked up, reshaped, and passed on by others, forming a kind of immortality grounded in relationships and legacy. Modern technology has amplified this effect. Social media, digital archives, and cloud storage allow us to preserve unprecedented amounts of personal data. Videos, voice recordings, and written reflections can remain accessible for decades, even centuries. Some people now curate their digital presence as part of their long-term legacy, knowing that what they say or create may outlive them. There is even emerging interest in AI-based avatars that can respond in the voice and style of a deceased person, trained on their digital footprint. Though these are not true continuations of consciousness, they represent an echo of identity, a way of remaining perceptible in the social fabric. From a psychological perspective, remembering the dead is a core human behavior. Rituals of mourning, memorials, and anniversaries all serve to keep the deceased present in the lives of the living. Grief is not about forgetting but adapting to a new kind of relationship, one in which the person is gone physically, but remains mentally and emotionally active. Studies show that many bereaved individuals continue to talk to lost loved ones, hear their voices in memory, or make decisions based on what they believe the person would have said. This phenomenon, known as continuing bonds, reflects the persistence of the dead in the minds of the living. History, too, plays a role in collective memory. Figures like Marie Curie, Nelson Mandela, or Leonardo da Vinci remain part of human consciousness through their contributions. Their names, ideas, and stories become nodes in the collective neural network of civilization. Though they no longer exist as individuals, aspects of their identity are still shaping lives, guiding decisions, and inspiring new creations. Religious traditions have long emphasized this kind of remembrance. Ancestor worship, for example, is based on the belief that the dead continue to influence the world of the living. In many cultures, maintaining the memory of one's ancestors is a moral duty and a way to stay connected across generations. In Judaism, the phrase, "May their memory be a blessing," reflects the idea that remembrance itself carries spiritual weight. Yet the collective memory is not static, it evolves. Stories are retold with new emphasis, facts are forgotten or rediscovered, reputations shift. What persists is not a perfect replica of the person, but a composite, a symbolic presence shaped by context and interpretation. This makes legacy not just a matter of what we leave behind, but of how others choose to carry it forward. In the end, the idea of living on in the memory of others offers a quiet kind of comfort. It suggests that every act of kindness, every insight shared, and every connection formed becomes part of something larger than oneself. It is not eternal life in the traditional sense, but it is a form of continuity, rooted not in the preservation of the self, but in the influence of a life well lived. When the last breath is drawn, what remains is silence, not only the physical stillness of a body no longer moving, but a deeper quiet, the absence of thought, feeling, and awareness. Across human history, this silence has evoked awe, fear, and contemplation. It is the great blank space at the end of the sentence, the horizon past which no traveler returns. In this segment, we explore what that silence might mean, not as an ending, but as a concept in itself, worthy of reflection. From a scientific standpoint, death marks the irreversible cessation of biological function. The heart stops, oxygen flow ceases, and brain activity halts. Without energy to sustain the electrochemical processes of life, neurons fail, synapses break down, and consciousness fades. In clinical terms, this state is final. There is no experience, no perception, no self. And yet, for all its finality, death's silence does not feel empty to those who reflect on it. It is filled with meaning, precisely because we are alive and able to imagine its opposite. In neuroscience, the cessation of brain function is measurable, but what cannot be measured is the subjective absence, what it's like to no longer be. This has led to the concept of experiential nothingness, the idea that death is not a place, not a state, but the absence of all states. This absence is impossible to grasp directly. Every thought we have is shaped by contrast, light and dark, sound and quiet, presence and absence, but death lies outside those categories. It is not something we observe, but something we cease to observe. That paradox has led philosophers to describe death not as an experience, but as the end of experiencing itself. In ancient philosophy, Epicurus argued that death should not be feared, because when it comes, we are no longer there to suffer it. Where death is, we are not, he wrote, and where we are, death is not. From this view, death is a boundary that marks the end of consciousness, and fearing it is like fearing the time before we were born, a time that passed without our awareness or concern. Yet this silence has also been interpreted in other ways. In some Eastern traditions, the cessation of ego and identity is seen not as loss, but as return. In Buddhism, for example, the ideal state is not eternal selfhood but nirvana, a release from desire, suffering, and even individual consciousness. Here, silence is not feared but welcomed, as a merging with something larger and more enduring than the self. Modern secular thinkers sometimes draw on these ideas to suggest that death might be a form of cosmic stillness, a return to the universe, not in form or thought, but in substance. The atoms of the body rejoin the earth, the carbon re-enters the cycle of life, and the energy dissipates into space. In this sense, silence is not destruction, but redistribution. The person ends, but the matter continues. Psychologically, the idea of eternal silence can be distressing. Many people find it difficult to accept that the stream of thought, the voice within, could ever stop. Yet others find peace in the idea that the self does not have to persist forever, that the world goes on. That meaning is not dependent on infinite time, but on what was said and done before the silence. This perspective gives weight to every moment that comes before. If death is the final pause, then life is the symphony that precedes it. Each decision, emotion, and connection becomes more poignant against the backdrop of its inevitable end. In this framing, the silence after life is not a void to be feared, but a context that makes existence more vivid. It is not uncommon, especially near death, for individuals to describe a sense of quiet, even before consciousness fades, a softening of the inner noise, a sense of letting go. Whether this is biological, emotional, or spiritual, it reminds us that silence is not always absence. It can also be presence, the presence of stillness, of completion, of return. We may never know what, if anything, lies beyond that threshold, but we can approach it with clarity, humility, and perhaps even a kind of gratitude. For in the silence after life, there is no pain, no striving, no need, only the gentle closing of the story and the quiet echo of all that came before. The idea of the afterlife is as old as human awareness of death itself. Across cultures, across centuries, people have imagined what might come next, visions shaped by fear, hope, longing, and love. Some have looked to the heavens, others to cycles of rebirth, and some to the inner mysteries of the soul or the code of consciousness itself. But perhaps the most enduring truth is this: the afterlife is not only something we await, but something we carry within us, every day, every breath, every memory. From a biological perspective, humans are not wired to grasp non-existence. The brain constructs time around continuity. We imagine our future selves, we preserve the past, and we extend empathy across distances we cannot touch. These traits allow us to plan and dream, but they also create the condition for envisioning an afterlife. Whether shaped by faith or metaphor, it emerges naturally from how we think, love, and remember. The afterlife may not be a singular realm. Instead, it may be a collection of reflections, places where we store the people we've lost, the impact they had, the words they spoke. It may exist in the minds of others, in the art left behind, in a child's gesture that mirrors a parent now gone. It may appear in the way a voice echoes in memory, or how a favorite song seems to bring someone back for just a moment. It is in this sense that the afterlife lives not only in beliefs, but in biology. Mirror neurons fire when we observe others, allowing us to feel what they feel. Our brains are tuned for resonance, for shared experience. Through this resonance, others remain present long after they have departed. Their lives continue to shape ours, not through mysticism, but through neural connections, stories told, and choices made in their name. Some scientists suggest that what we truly fear is not death, but disconnection. The end of relationship, the loss of shared reality. If that is so, then the most powerful form of the afterlife is not eternal survival, but the restoration of connection, even if symbolic. This is why we light candles, write names in stone, tell stories, and whisper into the night. We are building bridges across silence. In this final segment, as your body relaxes and your breathing slows, allow yourself to rest with this thought. Whatever lies beyond life, it is not more important than the life you live now. The afterlife, in its many interpretations, reminds us of the value of each moment, the depth of each bond, and the enduring power of memory. You do not have to believe in heaven, reincarnation, or consciousness in the cloud to find meaning in what follows death. Meaning exists in the legacy we leave, the comfort we give, and the questions we keep asking. If there is an afterlife, perhaps it is made not of places but of presence, the presence of those who once loved, once laughed, once gave, and once wondered. As you drift towards sleep now, know that it is okay not to have all the answers. It is okay to rest in uncertainty. Just as night follows day, and waking follows sleep, life is followed by something we do not yet understand. But in the time we are given, we can live fully, remember deeply, and leave traces of ourselves in the world and in each other. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let the tension slip from your body. Let the thoughts quiet, one by one. Whatever tomorrow brings, you have lived today, and that is more than enough. We, from Sleepy Stories, wish you a good night.